It brought me to another screen. So
there we are.
Awesome. All righty.
Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. Blessings on 2022. This is the second regular session of the 130th Legislature. This is the Joint Standing Committee on Labor and Housing. Welcome back to all of my colleagues and to everyone who's watching. We're going to have a great session. We're going to do very good bipartisan work. I have no doubt in my mind about that. And I will begin this committee meeting with committee introductions, and then we'll do a little special one at the end. So I'll begin on my screen with Representative Pepworth.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Sarah Pepworth. I represent House District 133 in the Blue Hill Peninsula.
Representative Geer.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Geer. I represent House District 9, which is Kennebunkport and Coastal Biddeford and Kennebunk.
Representative Cuddy.
Good morning. My name is Scott Cuddy, and I represent House District 98, which is Winterport, Frankfort, Searsport, and Swanville, and I live in Winterport.
Representative Drinkwater.
Greetings from balmy Milford. Gary Drinkwater, District 121.
Representative Bradstreet.
Hi, good morning. I am Representative Dick Bradstreet. I represent House District 80, which is comprised of my hometown of Vassalboro, Windsor, Somerville, and part of Augusta.
Representative Warren.
Good morning. I'm Representative Sophie Warren, and I'm very honored to represent my hometown of Scarborough, Maine, House District 129.
Representative Rader.
Hi, I'm Representative Amy Rader, and I represent House District 125, which is a portion of Bangor.
Representative Morris.
Good morning. I'm Representative Joshua Morris. I represent House District 75, which is Turner, Leeds, and Livermore.
And Chairman Sylvester.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Representative Mike Sylvester. I represent the Eastern Peninsula portion of Portland and the islands of Casco Bay, and I'm the House Chair of this committee.
And with us, we have Mr. Stephen Langland, our analyst from OPLA. And this session, Mr. Purvis, if you turn on your camera for a moment, please, I'd like to introduce Justin Purvis, who is our new committee clerk for this session, who's replacing Alyssa Thompson, who has moved on to greener pastures. And Mr. Purvis, if you'd just like to say a brief word.
Hi, thank you. My name is Justin Purvis, committee clerk for Labor and Housing. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. I'm State Senator Craig Hickman. I represent 11 towns in southern Kennebec County in District 14 of the Maine Legislature. Today, our agenda is rather short. We will begin most of our deep public hearing work and work sessions on January the 19th, which is next Wednesday. But today is a very important day because we have two report backs from commissions that met in the intersession, one on housing, one on basic income security, and we may do some other housekeeping work with Mr. Langland leading the way. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Langland to walk us through what we're going to do today and to get started with the presentation from the Housing Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a lot. I'm happy to go through, depending on which one you want to start with, the sort of the overview of what the Zoning and Housing Commission decided and sort of how they conducted their meetings. And then I know that we have some folks, including the speaker, that could sort of speak to those recommendations, but I'm happy to go through it if you'd like to start with that report. Or
we are definitely going to start with the report on zoning. And I also would like to allow Senator Guerin, who has joined us, to introduce herself. And then I will begin to look at who to bring into our meeting to begin the presentation. Senator Guerin. You're on mute, ma'am.
Well, I was saying I'm out of practice on Zoom meetings, so there's another incident of it. I am Senator Stacey Guerin. I represent Senate District 10 in Southern Penobscot County.
Welcome. I am going to promote Speaker Fecto to become a panelist since he was the brainchild of the bill that got the commission started, and he was my very able co-chair. This is the crux of a body of work that he has been working on for a very long time. So without further ado, I will allow Speaker Fecto to introduce himself to the committee.
Thank you, Senator Hickman, Representative Sylvester, members of the Labor and Housing Committee. Good to see all of you. Thanks for taking the time to hear this presentation this morning. My name is Ryan Fecta. I represent my hometown of Biddeford, District 11 in the legislature, and I have the honor of serving as Speaker of the House. And I will jump into a presentation or provide information regarding the work of the Commission on Zoning and Land Use at your direction.
Well, Mr. Speaker, will you please, if anyone else from the commission would like to, excuse me, to be a part of this presentation and you are here, please raise your hand and I can promote you to panelist. And then I will just ask you to walk us through the work that we did, and then the committee can certainly ask questions about it and we can have a discussion about it. We do know that this is a part of a process where this committee has an opportunity to report out a bill on this commission report, or we can implement the recommendations in 2 placeholder bills that are currently being drafted by the revisor of statutes. That will be our choice as a committee, but we do know that that is our charge. So with that, I'm going to ask any other commission members who are here to raise their hands if they would like to join the panel at any time. Until such time as I see that, Mr. Speaker, the floor is yours.
I do have a slideshow presentation. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share my screen, but I'll give it a go.
We will make sure that you
I think I can. I think I can. Okay, this is good. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. And hopefully I'll do a good job of clicking through appropriately, but I'm going to be learning as I go here. So I apologize for that. So I guess just to start off by providing sort of a lay of the land from August to December, Senator Hickman and I had the honor of chairing the commission to increase housing opportunities in Maine by studying zoning and land use restrictions. As all of you are well aware, Maine is facing an affordable housing crisis, and too many municipalities, a web of various zoning and land use ordinances and state laws, some decades old, are preventing sensible, affordable housing projects, both big and small, from coming to fruition. Our commission was thoughtful about how Maine can grow the supply of housing through new construction and how we can incentivize the revitalization of buildings and housing stock that already exists right here across our state. Our meetings focused on Maine's current approach to zoning, specific municipal issues involving zoning, the historical role of race and racism in zoning policies, and how land use and zoning laws affect housing in Maine. The commission unanimously agreed that local control is incredibly important for our communities. So our recommendations all look at how to incentivize and not necessarily use a stick approach, removing the barriers that stand in the way of meeting housing needs of the citizens of Maine. In our final report, the commission recognized both the immediate need to increase housing in Maine and the need to help our towns and cities plan ahead to address this challenge in the future. Again, Maine needs more housing today to accommodate our workforce, young people who are hoping to stay here, young people who are hoping to move here, and older Mainers. And these needs will only grow in the decades to come. We know that if we don't address Maine's housing crisis now, our state will not be a feasible place for families, older Mainers, and our workforce to live and thrive. And with these realities in mind, we published 9 total recommendations to help municipalities and our state produce more affordable housing. I'm proud that we were able to deliver significant consensus recommendations that have the potential to expand housing opportunities here in our state. And so, before I go over the 9 recommendations, I wanted to just provide the committee with a reminder of whom comprised this commission. It was made up of experts from real estate, agriculture, the environment, civil rights groups, municipality management, the building and developer communities, and legislators on both sides of the aisle. And I would note that I think in terms of the legislators, other than myself, I think the 3 other legislators definitely brought an expertise outside of policymaking that I thought was really important. Obviously, Senator Hickman serving on this committee, having heard a number of bills related to housing already, and of course, bringing a unique and important perspective when we had a tough but needed conversation on the role racism plays in zoning and land use. And then, of course, Senator Pouliot's his experience as a real estate agent, and Representative Arata's experience as a owner of multifamily housing units that she rents as a landlord. But all bring very important perspective. And so, as you can see, we had Dan Brennan, Director of Maine State Housing Authority, Hannah Pingree representing the Governor's Office, John Napolitano representing the building trades, Madeline Hill representing the real estate industry, Cheryl Golick representing organization that advocates for low-income Mainers and middle-income renters, Kate Dufour representing a statewide municipal association, namely Maine Municipal Association, Dana Topman from Avesta Housing representing a statewide organization that advocates for affordable housing, Heather Spalding representing statewide agricultural interests, Jeff Levine representing a regional planning association or statewide organization that advocates for smart growth policies and projects, Aaron Cooperrider, member who is a residential developer, and Anthony Jackson representing a local or statewide organization promoting civil rights that has racial justice or racial equity as its primary mission. I think the commission benefited greatly from having this wide breadth of experiences and people, this commission and these commissioners were highly engaged from the moment of go. And I really cannot thank them enough for their contributions to our work. I think we were very lucky and fortunate to have such a great group of people with diversity of perspectives to contribute to this work. So we have a number of recommendations, and I'll go through them, and I'll probably take questions at the end. That way I can try to get through the recommendations quickly. Recommendation number 1 is allowing accessory dwelling units by right in all zoning restrictions currently zoned for single family homes. This is probably a recommendation you all are familiar with because you all heard LD 1312 in the first regular session. So the commission unanimously recommends allowing accessory dwelling units by right in all zoning districts currently zoned for single family homes. An ADU is currently defined in Maine law as a self-contained dwelling unit located within, attached to, or detached from a single family dwelling unit located on the same parcel of land. While the commission did not go as far as to endorse LD 1312 specifically, it unanimously agreed that ADUs should be permitted by right in all districts zoned for single family housing. And again, this was a 15-0 vote. Recommendation number 2 was to eliminate single family zoning restrictions in all residential zones across the state by allowing up to 4 residential units on all lots in compliance with any health and safety requirements such as minimum septic and lot sizes, and with a sunrise clause to provide adequate time for municipalities to prepare for this change. This vote was 13-2. As long as the units are built in a way that complies with any health and safety requirements, such as building codes, and when determined to be environmentally sound on properties served by private wastewater and drinking water systems, and on properties subject to applicable shoreland zoning laws and regulations. Because of the significance of this change, the commission recommends a sunrise clause to provide municipalities adequate time to prepare for and adapt to this change. This is probably one of the most significant recommendations that the commission put forward. Obviously, moving from having zoning restrictions that say only a single family home can be built somewhere to moving to up to 4 units will dramatically change the potential for what kind of housing stock might be made available in our communities across the state. Important clarifications here. First and foremost, this is not to say that that someone cannot build a single family home on a lot. This is to say that if you are someone who owns land and you want to build a 4-unit, a 4-unit or 3-unit or a 2-unit on a lot, that so long as you meet all the necessary requirements to maintain and the soundness of infrastructure such as water and so forth, that you were allowed to do that. And I think this will move our state forward in a significant way towards addressing the housing crunch. Recommendation number 3 was to prohibit municipal growth caps on the production of new housing. This was a 14-1 vote. A majority of the commission supports the need to prohibit growth caps. This consensus arose from a recognition that municipalities have many other tools at their disposal to plan for local development and general growth, and that growth caps are an artificial and cumbersome barrier to affordable housing. Ultimately, the production of more units will create more affordable housing, and the commission encourages municipalities to use those other tools, perhaps with technical assistance from the state, to responsibly plan for local development and growth without having these artificial caps in place. This was discussed during the work of the commission, but there was a community mentioned that reached its growth cap in June of 2021. And so no further housing was able to be developed in that particular community that met its growth cap in the middle of the year. And that just provides sort of an illustration of the kind of challenges that these artificial caps present to addressing housing. Now, it's not to say that this community should not, plan smartly, or any community in Maine should not plan smartly for where development occurs and how much of it occurs. It's to say that these things should not be outright prevented by a cap that is arbitrary. Recommendation number 4 provides technical assistance and financial assistance for all communities seeking support in making zoning improvements and identifying opportunities for increasing affordable housing. This was a 15-0 vote. The commission unanimously recommended that the state provide technical and financial assistance to communities seeking the state's support in making zoning improvements and identifying opportunities for increasing affordable housing. The commission recognized that local governments will need additional resources to proactively plan for housing production, for any of the commission's other recommendations to be implemented successfully and ultimately achieve the goal of increasing housing opportunities in the state. The state should provide funding for technical assistance for all communities seeking support in making zoning improvements and implementing other policy changes and programs. The commission received numerous suggestions on how to provide this technical and financial assistance, and all are included in our report, including potential state agencies we identified who might best provide the technical and financial assistance. This was a recommendation that was this recommendation was largely supported by the Maine Municipal Association, who really emphasized the significance of not just putting forward recommendations and then leaving municipalities to sort of scramble and try to figure out how to implement them, but to give communities recommendations that will improve the state of housing in our state, but also provide the support for these communities to make the changes necessary to have those conversations and to have an expertise at the state level or contracted with an outside organization that can really help communities in addressing what their current zoning says or what it doesn't say to generate better opportunities for housing to be developed. So this was a pretty significant recommendation, and one that I think will have a significant impact on our ability to help communities address their own zoning now and into the future. Recommendation number 5 created density bonuses in all residential zones throughout the state, giving low to middle income housing projects 2.5 times the density of the existing zone, with a parking requirement of no more than 0.66 spaces per unit for the additional units, and with the requirement that those units be protected as affordable for a specific period of time. This was a 14-1 vote. The commission makes this recommendation in recognition of the general principle that a certain threshold number of units need to be met in a project in order to spread out costs sufficiently to make those units affordable, and density bonuses have proven to be an effective way of achieving that end. The commission recognizes this could be a highly effective tool for municipalities to encourage affordable housing, and believes any concerns about quality of life or segregation of low-income housing can be mitigated by requiring that density bonuses are applicable to all residential zones. And then finally, recommendation 6 creates a 3-year statewide incentive program for municipalities. And this would work as follows. In year 1, a qualifying community must make a commitment to reviewing zoning and land use restrictions. In year 2 and 3, the community must adopt zoning and land use policies that promote housing opportunities. Qualifying communities would receive a state financial reward for up to 3 years, so long as they remain in good standing with the program requirements. This was a 14-1 vote. A majority of the commission recommends creating a 3-year statewide program that will provide incentives to municipalities that want to review their zoning and land use restrictions. During the first year, a qualifying community would be required to make the commitment to reviewing its zoning and land use restrictions. In other words, establishing a working group of some sort that brings together stakeholders in the community to discuss the zoning and land use restrictions that are currently on the books or should be on the books to promote housing. During the second and third years, the community will be required to adopt zoning and land use regulations that promote housing opportunities, such as reducing the minimum lot size or relaxing parking requirements. Qualifying communities will receive a financial reward from the state up to 3 years, so long as the community remains in good standing with the program requirements. The final piece is critical to ensuring that there's an appropriate accountability for communities receiving the funds to make the desired zoning and policy changes. In considering incentives, the commission encouraged the new units be affordable and accessible to people with low incomes and to people from racial and ethnic communities that have historically faced discrimination in housing. While the commission does not formally recommend a specific agency, the commission identified it as potential candidates the Department of Economic and Community Development or the Department of Agricultural Conservation and Forestry, which is the agency that currently includes the Land Use Planning Commission, Municipal Planning Assistance Program, and other planning and land use offices. The Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the future may also be a potential administrator for this program. Recommendation 7, create a system of priority development zones where areas where multifamily housing is permitted with limited regulatory barriers. This was a 10-5 vote. A majority of the commission recommends creating a framework to promote priority development areas, otherwise known as PDAs, in every community. These PDAs, which would prioritize multifamily housing, are growth areas that meet basic requirements for density and convenient access to amenities and would benefit from expedited state review to encourage development in a more expedited manner. Many communities will find that they already have these areas in their communities that would qualify. For example, a likely candidate for a priority development area would be an existing traditional town village center or town center. The destination as a priority development area would help put the infrastructure in place to make higher density development workable in that area. So as we were having the conversation during the course of the commission, since we all have been in Augusta and have gone over to Hollowell at one time or another, Hollowell was used as an example of as a community that has an existing downtown and already has fairly dense zoning in its downtown. And that would be a community that already has a development area zone that could be designated without much work to be put into it. In some communities, it's going to require a little bit more planning to determine where that priority development area might be for them. Recommendation number 8 strengthens Maine's Fair Housing Act by eliminating the terms character, overcrowding of land, and undue concentration of population as legal bases for zoning regulations. This was a 13-1 vote. The commission recommends strengthening Maine's fair housing laws by eliminating the terms character, overcrowding of land, and undue concentration of population as legal basis for zoning regulations. These vague terms are often used to restrict the construction of affordable housing and lead to exclusionary zoning. Exclusionary zoning relates to the restrictive land use and zoning policies meant to exclude certain areas, certain uses of land that are often accomplished through low density regulation, large minimum lot sizes, parking requirements, height restrictions, explicit population growth controls, and sometimes excessive bureaucratic procedures and delays. By contrast, consideration of physical site characteristics, not people or their income sources or levels, are more appropriately provide guidelines for how to determine whether housing should or should not be built. And then finally, recommendation number 9 creates a state-level housing appeals board to review denials of affordable housing projects made at the local level. This was a 12-2 vote. A majority of the commission recommends that the legislature create a state-level housing appeals board to review denials of affordable housing projects that are made at the local level, especially in situations in which it appears that a community is engaging in exclusionary zoning or is effectively prohibiting or excluding viable affordable housing proposals from being developed. A housing appeals board could also fast-track viable affordable housing proposals that have zoning by right but are met with costly or unreasonable delays. The legislature would need to examine the details of a state-level housing appeals board, including its composition, the scope of the board's authority, and the process by which appeals could be brought by and by whom. A majority of the commission believes this board could serve as an effective tool to increase housing opportunities and discourage segregation, discrimination, or poverty concentration. In conclusion, the commission recognizes that the plan for addressing Maine's housing shortages must be multifaceted, and that there is both an immediate need to increase housing opportunities in Maine and a need to plan for increased housing opportunities in the future. Commission members look forward to working with all of you, members of this Joint Standing Committee on Labor and Housing, to refine the details of our recommendations and craft a final bill or bills that advance the state's policy goals. The commission urges the legislature to continue its work that the commission has begun as continued research and studies of these critical issues continue to unfold and develop. I would also just mention there were some issues that we certainly touched upon during the course of our work. I'm sure many of you are thinking about short-term rentals and the impact that they have, Airbnb and so forth, have on our communities and the availability of housing. We spoke to those issues during the course of our conversations, but we did not make any final recommendations on that issue in particular. But it is mentioned in the report. I would also mention that there are several appendices in the report that include the presentations that we received from experts here in Maine and across the country in this area of policy. I would highly recommend checking those out. We were, I think, if anything, blessed to have the opportunity to really take the time to hear from people across the state and across the country who have a great deal of experience and expertise in this policy area. And I think we all learned a lot about how to best address these issues. And I was really grateful for the opportunity to hear from those folks. And that we also heard from municipal leaders, including the mayor of Auburn, who has led the charge in his own community to change some of these zoning ordinances, and was definitely a good example of what might be possible if we take on this really tough work, but obviously very critical work as we see more and more communities facing the crunch that this housing crisis has provided. So with that, I will stop and I will take any questions if there are any, and I'll try to stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Speaker Fecto, for that excellent overview of the work of this committee. I know hands are going to go up. I just want to also point the committee and anyone watching to page 25 and 26 of the report, because the other additional considerations that we took no action on, including short-term rentals, which the speaker mentioned, were fees and related costs for development and permitting, farm worker housing, the reconstitution of the state planning office, and energy efficient building materials. I was remiss at the beginning to tell the audience that the chat function is really only used for technical issues in our committees. Now, today is slightly different because this isn't a public hearing. And I know that this is a great topic that everyone is interested in. And I see there are some comments and questions in the chat. And so what I may do is just ask those of the commission. If there's anyone on the commission who would also like to answer a question that is asked that either Speaker Fecto or I are not the expert at asking, I will ask you to raise your hand and I will move you into the panel to answer the questions that may come from the committee. But this is work for the committee to have their questions asked and answered. And if we do report out a bill or a set of bills, there will be a public hearing on all of those pieces of proposals, legislation. And at that point, the public will be able to also offer testimony to whatever the recommendations are that we are intending to move forward. And if people have objections to those, that's the perfect time for the public to weigh in on that. So with all of that, I will go to Representative Bradstreet for the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Speaker, for being here. I appreciate all your work on this. I know this is a very important issue we're talking about here. First of all, I'd like to just stress that the 4-unit, which we're talking about on where a single-family home can go, is very important, because a 4-family, anything over that, it brings in different types of financing that are available, and anything under that 3 units sometimes is not financially viable. So it's a very important piece of this presentation, and I want to thank you for that. I'm looking at recommendation number, yes, 6, I believe it was.
The incentive program.
Yes, yes. And I'm talking about, I have a background in manufactured housing. I know it hasn't been mentioned specifically in this particular report. I do find that in my history, it's been an excellent way for people to enter the housing ladder and then getting to something that's fairly inexpensive to start with, and then work their way up from there. It's been presented a good opportunity for a lot of people. I know there'll be a lot of opposition to any encouragement of manufactured housing communities and that sort of thing. I think the issue is not the how they're built, but maybe the covenants that are lacking, and to make sure that the places are attractive and kept that way and fit in with the architecture of the area. So I'm wondering if there's something we could pursue there, just to make sure that that's part of the discussion. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Bradshaw. Really appreciate the question, and definitely a very important point on the 4 units. I think that was brought up during the course of our conversation, that the financing related to 4 units versus anything above is different. And so in terms of making these recommendations that are also accessible to people who are seeking financing and want to be able to build up to 4 units on a lot, that was a really important piece, because obviously if you're someone that's looking to build a home or homes, as it may be, on a single lot, having the ability to build up to 4 and have that secondary income that allows you to pay your mortgage and so forth is certainly an important piece of this. It's not only about addressing housing, but it also could be addressing some of the challenges people face in home ownership to begin with. So that's a very good point. As it relates to manufactured housing, we did have a conversation, and Senator Hickman may be able to provide some insight as well. We had a conversation at various points about manufactured housing. I can't quite recall in what contexts that was brought up, but I believe there was some conversation about whether or not, especially I think as we had municipal leaders presenting to us, about whether or not there was zoning on the books that outright prohibited manufactured housing from being put on especially single family lots, and whether or not there was a prohibition. I believe at one point there may have been a prohibition in that regard at the state level, and I think it has been repealed. But it certainly was brought up in the context of how we can get folks to become homeowners, and having, as you mentioned, Representative Bradstreet, that first step into home ownership at a lower cost of entry versus buying a single family home that can be a little bit more challenging in that regard. But Chairman Hickman may have better memory than I on this particular matter.
Thank you, Speaker Fecto. I tend to have a very good memory, but I can't say that I remember the entire context of our conversation around manufactured housing or tiny housing. I am looking in the gallery and I see we have these following commissioners with us. Commissioner Brennan, who's the Director of Maine State Housing, is with us. We have Commissioner Spalding, Commissioner Levine, Commissioner Dufour, and I believe that's it for now. So if any of them remember a discussion in the context around manufactured housing that Representative Bradstreet has brought to our attention, please raise your hand and I will promote you to the chat to help provide some more enlightenment around this issue. I know Commissioner Levine has a great memory, and so I'm kind of putting him on the spot, but I don't know if he is available right now or not to help us out with this issue. And if so, we can come back around to this. In the meanwhile, we will move on. Representative Cuddy has a question.
Thank you, Senator Hickman, and thank you, Speaker Fecto, for being here to give us this presentation this morning. A number of the recommendations that the Commission has provided for us seem that they would have funding attached to them. We're going to have to fund, be it a department, be it some grants, something or other. Did the Commission have any thoughts on where this funding might come from?
Good question. We had conversations about where would the money come from, and ultimately we did punt on specifying specifically where these funds would come from. I think in some contexts, for example, the incentive program, I don't think we're looking at funding that needs to be forever. I think the hope would be that you get a large number of communities involved in that program, and the program has the intended effect of getting municipalities to have these conversations and then ultimately adopt policies or ordinances that would generate more housing in their community. So I don't know if we're looking at, in terms of the incentive program, something that lasts forever or something that is only needed in the immediate to sort of look at some of the, I think in some communities, these conversations just haven't happened, or they haven't happened in a very direct way as it relates to in the context of having like a working group established, and then you're doing that sort of the same work the commission did, but in the context of your own municipality. And what are the current rules? What could be the rules? And what do we want our community to look like in terms of housing opportunities? And so I think that was the point. And so I guess what I'm saying is, I think on the incentive program, one-time funding would not necessarily be a bad thing. I think that one-time funding could certainly work, which means, perhaps some of the surplus dollars would go towards that. There's also, although probably more unlikely, we'll see what happens in Washington, but I know that there have been proposals in DC that include a similar provision around an incentive program for municipalities to look at zoning and land use. And so there also might be federal dollars that end up becoming available for those purposes. So that was encouraging. Although I'm skeptical of what Washington is capable of getting passed these days, but I'll remain hopeful on that end. And as far as the technical assistance, that certainly would be something we'd want to see long term. I think that's where there could be the greatest impact on continuing to provide these supports and services to communities as over time. And so obviously hoping that the technical assistance might be built in over the long term into a budget.
Thank you, Speaker Fecto. Not that I can allocate this money right here in this conversation, but I do know that there has been a significant amount of money set aside, or we probably voted it out in our ARPA budget last year. I think it's $50 million that at this point in time, the Office of the Governor is trying to work with stakeholders to figure out how to use. And it's safe to say that perhaps that may be a source of some of what we're doing here as well. I know Director Brennan, again, is here. I'm not going to ask him to commit those funds to us at this moment either, but we have decided to invest in increased affordable housing, and so the money is available. Representative Geer.
Thank you, Senator Hickman. And I do want to commend the entire commission for the hard work that was done and the recommendations, which do have good potential from my standpoint. I do want to delve a little into the ADU question, because as we all know on this committee, we talked about it for a long time last session. I just want to make sure I understand the recommendation from the commission. So the recommendation is to go forward to say ADUs can be built anywhere without specifying anything about at least one unit being owner occupied, or some limitation on anything that would prevent those ADUs from immediately going towards short-term rental, as opposed to relieving any kind of residential housing crisis.
Yeah, so no, the commission's recommendation did include a provision that would prevent these units from being added to the housing stock and then being used as short-term rentals. So the owner occupied language I have learned has some potential challenges that we may want to consider. And so I'm currently working to draft a bill that implements some of these recommendations. And I've borrowed language from the town of Kittery, which specifies that the units cannot be used for rentals that are shorter than 30 days, which I think hits home at this issue versus so for any ADUs built at the time of the passage of this law, they cannot be used for rentals under 30 days.
Okay.
Which clarified some problems because, for example, there are nonprofit organizations that build housing and they are considered the owner, but they do not occupy the primary dwelling or the ADU. And they were concerned about their ability to build ADUs and make them available for housing if they are not owner occupied, for example. And so that was one of several different pieces of. Originally, the recommendation was about owner occupied, and then in talking to advocates, there have been many concerns raised by people who are with good intentions about trying to build housing, who think that owner occupied language is perhaps not the right way to go in addressing the short-term rental issue. And so the bill that I'm working on will reflect a provision around ADUs and preventing them for short-term use.
Okay, that's an interesting conundrum, because when you certainly in conversations that I've had with constituents here, the issue then becomes, if you are an owner and you're building an ADU on your own property where you're also living, then we immediately run into the challenge of, how do we track that? How do we know how that property is being used? So clearly, if it's a nonprofit or an organization that's working with the public, we can keep tabs on that. I think that becomes much more difficult when you're dealing with just residential areas. So I just tossed that in there. I'd be curious I want to have obviously more conversation about that particular element of it.
Yeah, and talking to the town of Kittery, who has made a lot of changes to their zoning and land use ordinances, they considered language around owner occupied for ADU when they have a very forward thinking ADU policy in Kittery, and their concern was compliance. They felt like it would be very difficult to confirm whether or not the primary residence is owner occupied or not, and getting complaints about people who, maybe they stay on the weekends at a partner's place or something, and then the neighbors calling and saying that their primary dwelling is actually not owner occupied. And so that's why I think they pursued language around limiting the number of days that the ADU could be rented. So in Kittery, the number of days is 30 or more. That the unit has to be rented for more than 30 days. So I think highly constraining those Airbnbs that are weekend rentals or weekday, week-long rentals and so forth. And obviously, I'm open to, once the bill hits your committee, certainly you can maybe manipulate the numbers. But I because there was already a community, and I know other communities have taken on this challenge as well, because there was already policy in place that I felt might be worthwhile reflecting in the bill. I have thus far taken the language from Kittery. It just felt like it was easier to replicate what a community has already done versus reinventing the wheel.
Great. And Mr. Chair, if I could, just one additional question on the same topic.
Please proceed.
The other area where I think this is, I'm not clear on what the recommendation is around shoreland zoning. So in areas that are currently zoned shoreland, are those areas, if they're single family housing, are they also then able to build ADUs there?
Yes. Yeah. So I think the intention with these policies is that any of the local ordinances, in the case of shoreline zoning, statewide policy, cannot be more restrictive on the ADU than it is, the same rules that apply to the primary dwelling need to apply to the ADU. So so long as the ADU is built within the confines of shoreline zoning laws, then the ADU is permitted. They can't be more excessive than the primary dwelling.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pebworth has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also commend the commissioners for the fine work and the heft of the volume full of resources. And I was happy to hear the short-term rental conversation and look forward to looking at that legislation. We know that that's a tremendous problem. So we'll continue poking away at it, and I can understand why it was set aside from these other recommendations. Another set aside was regarding energy efficiency. And that was another one that I was disappointed to see. I think that's an area that we all want to be pushing forward as forcefully as we can. So I would flag that for a comment or more conversation. And then I'll just also mention another thing. I was wondering, two other things, I guess. One, in terms of density and density bonuses and just the conversation overall, I'm curious to know how the commissioners dealt with the differences between Portland, Biddeford, a small town such as Blue Hill, where I live. It seems really hard to have overreaching policy that is effective in these various towns. And I know there was a lot of discussion about local control, which we're always happy to hear here in Blue Hill. So I'd love to hear a little bit more of that. And then the last bit was 0.66 parking and the background about how 3/4 of a car, less than 3/4 of a car works as we add units. So with that, I will say thank you again for being here, and I look forward to listening to more.
Thank you, Representative Pepworth. I'm definitely going to kick the density bonuses conversation to Commissioner Levine, should he be able to jump on, because he is definitely far and away an expert on that stuff more than I am. But, as far as your initial question around how do you balance the clear differences that we have from community to community across our state. We are a diverse state geographically, and there are different needs that our communities have. And obviously the makeup of those communities are very different. I think we were very intentional about the policy recommendations we put forward that would have statewide implications, ADUs and the up to 4 units on a lot, versus the policies that we put forward that left that space for municipalities to have the conversation. So, for example, we had a conversation about parking requirements, and we know that in some communities, parking requirements are indeed used to prevent housing from being built. There are in some cases, for example, one parking space off street parking for every unit in a unit. So for every bedroom in a unit, you need one off-street parking spot. So if you have a 3-bedroom unit, that's 3 off-street parking spots. That is pretty purposeful, and it's pretty much going to constrain and or take the possibility of a multifamily housing unit from ever being built in a community, because that is very constraining. But at the end of the day, having a statewide policy regarding parking requirements felt very difficult to put forward, and it felt like that kind of conversation. We didn't have a statewide recommendation on setbacks. So like those things feel like policy issues that need to be addressed at the local level. And honestly, I think you'll get better policy by having those conversations, because it's going to bring the community into the conversation so that they can contemplate what it is that is currently in place or is not in place, and how that impacts people who either live there or don't live there yet, but want to live there because maybe it's the place that they work. And it's important to them that they provide opportunities for people to live and work in the same place, right? So I think if you look at the recommendations, I feel like we put forward policy recommendations that were statewide in nature, that didn't need to necessarily take into account the wrinkles of community of the various types of communities we have in the state, and then we put forward recommendations that left the opportunity for nuance to be decided by the communities across the state. And so I think you see that in the recommendations. I also mentioned on the energy efficiency. I think one of the things that we were constantly dealing with was, we were a commission charged with looking at zoning and land use restrictions. And so having policy recommendations that sort of went beyond and above that, I think we were constantly trying to make sure that we didn't go beyond our scope. But obviously, as we're talking about the environment and climate change and the issues that are here and now, we know that housing has got to be a part of this conversation, and we know that dense building is going to be a part of this conversation. Having more people living closer together, having people having the opportunity to build multifamily housing, having the opportunity for someone to find a place to live in the community where they work. We know the impact that has on our ability to fight climate change. In Maine, we know transportation is the #1 emitter of carbon in the state. And so how do we address that challenge? Well, maybe making sure that someone doesn't have to commute 20, 30, 50 miles to get to work every day. Instead, having the opportunity to live in the place where they work. So I think that should be something that we're thinking about as we wrestle with these recommendations, because I think if we're able to implement them, we can address, in part, I think one of your concerns, Chris, is how do we do better by way of the environment?
Thank you, Speaker Fecto. And I'll just say as well, and the speaker spoke to it, our scope was limited to zoning and land use restrictions, but clearly we spoke about a lot of other issues that are barriers to increasing affordable housing, or other issues that need to be addressed when developing affordable housing, such as making sure that whatever new development we have are done in a way that's environmentally friendly. The governor's climate action plan, the equity subcommittee, which I serve on, we're looking at that issue as well. We certainly know that there's a bill right now that's been carried over on the appropriations table that asked for an enormous amount of money to go into investing into what we call green building. And so the work of our committee is to be comprehensive about how we advance the state policy goal of increasing affordable housing. And in doing so, there will always be that balance. We know that we are a state that has strong home rule authority as prescribed by the Constitution, but it is the legislature that limits that. And we don't always talk about that, but it limits it. And so sometimes what the legislature gives, the legislature takes away. Shoreland zoning is an example of a statewide policy that said municipalities must develop ordinances that deal with shoreland zoning. And the state policy sets forth guidelines that the municipalities have to consider when they are adopting their own shoreland zoning. So I would think that, we here are trying to advance state policy goals, working in cooperation with localities, and we can guide localities in how they craft those local considerations. And I think that balance is something we're always going to have to work through. Balancing private property rights versus increasing affordable housing development is clearly something that's been alluded to already by Representative Geer. Like, how do you tell a property owner that they cannot rent out their property? Do you put that in statute? Will that be unconstitutional? We don't know. But the point is that we have to balance all of these different rights and all of these different jurisdictional issues to advance the state policy goal of increasing affordable housing for as many people as we can. Because one of the other things that the commission recognized is that access to safe and affordable housing is a human right for every person. How to implement that and still honor our statutory scheme is our challenge. Commissioner Levine is here, and so I don't need to speak for him. He is an expert on many of these things. I certainly didn't understand some of the formulas around density bonuses because I'm not a real estate developer. But in that stead, I will invite Commissioner Levine to address anything that he has heard throughout this conversation, and then we can continue with more questions and discussion if required. Commissioner Levine, thank you for being here today. Please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Senator Hickman. My name is Jeff Levine. I'm a city planner by training. I was the planning director for Portland for 7 years, and now I teach at MIT, and I do consulting in Maine and New England on land use planning and housing policy. Really appreciated the chance to be on this commission. Want to thank Speaker Fecto and Senator Hickman for their work on this, and glad to hear the committee's questions. Sort of specifically on the idea of these density bonuses, 3 things I think came to a head on this one, and I think this one is actually really one of the most important recommendations. One is the idea of maintaining local control. So you'll see the bonuses are tied back to the base allowances in community zoning. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a density bonus based on the base allowances in community zoning. The second piece that I think is important is that it's based on a national best practice. Affordable housing overlays are a very common tool being used around the country as a way of promoting below market affordable housing. So this is not an idea that's new. This is one that's been used in a lot of places successfully as a way of producing more housing at different income levels. And the third thing I'll say about it is that the numbers may seem very specific. I don't believe Commissioner Cooper Ryder is here, but she did a lot of the legwork in calculating what sorts of bonuses might be necessary to allow below market affordable housing developers to actually compete for land. So think a little bit for a second about how land might be sold. Somebody has a piece of land and they put it on the market. And let's say there's 3 people who want to buy it: Starbucks, a high-end market rate developer, and someone who wants to build workforce housing. In order to have the surety and the ability to pay for that land, the below market affordable housing developer is going to need to know they can do more than the market rate developer, and also that they can do enough units that they can actually get financing from Maine Housing and from other sources to make the project work. So the 2.5 times the density isn't sort of picked randomly. That's actually picked based on an estimate of how much more production would need to happen on the site to allow that developer to compete for that land and actually produce the housing. The parking really came out of the fact that the reality is that for every 3 affordable units, almost no matter where they are in the state, there was a feeling that really 2 off-street parking spaces is as much as should be required. That doesn't mean a developer couldn't put more on that site if they felt it was needed, but as a requirement, the feeling was that was as much as made sense from a public purpose, and that more of that might discourage development of below market affordable housing. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Levine. Are there any other questions from the committee? Representative Bradstreet and Commissioner Levine, if you could just stay in the room, that would be fine with me. I won't promote you back to the attendee. Representative Bradstreet, you're on.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I just want to point out, I think Mr. Lamb in the chat section has brought forth a couple of good points that we need to consider going forward. Maybe not today,
yes,
but certainly going forward. A question I have is that as we're talking about putting different requirements on the communities, was there any discussion about the possibility or I guess the respect of still allowing private covenants that developers can put in? Was there any concern that they might be overlooked? I guess I'll ask that to any member of the commission who may have an answer to that. But I understand that it was a concern of maybe 1 or 2 people on the commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Speaker Facto or Commissioner Levine, do you recall any conversations about this in our work?
I do not recall the term private covenant being brought up, but perhaps Representative Bradstreet, could you use it as an example?
You said, yes, Representative Bradstreet, you mentioned in your question that there were some concerns from commissioners, and maybe I missed that in the footnotes. But
well, I think maybe no, I didn't see it in the footnotes. I just
okay.
Conversation, so it's probably a very minor item. I think this is something to watch for, is if we're looking at communities that maybe perhaps changing any zoning ordinances that they might have, that we ought to maybe be careful that we don't step on those developers who may wish to put in private covenants into their developments.
Right. Okay. I do recall this. Yes. Okay. I think Senator Pouliot mentioned this at one point during the course of the conversation. Yes. Yeah. I think what we concluded was none of the recommendations that we put forward would null and void any existing covenants and the ability for future covenants to be put in place as developments are. So I think Senator Pouliot used, I think, his own neighborhood as an example, and none of the recommendations we put forward would have any impact on those existing covenants. I think from a legal perspective, we would have to put some kind of language in the bill that would have some overarching power, I would imagine, over those already existing, because I mean those covenants are legally binding documents, and so there was no intention of putting language in that would null and void those already existing legal covenants.
Yeah, I do remember that conversation now. And Representative Bradstreet, the one thing that both sides have to be aware of is that a private covenant cannot run afoul of the Constitution. So or of a compelling state interest to do something. And so that's another place where things need to be balanced. And we have to look at that very carefully. But because this bill does not at all eliminate local control, it certainly does not eliminate the ability for private covenants to exist. It's just that every term of those covenants must necessarily be constitutionally protected. Representative Bradstreet.
Thank you. Glad to hear that. One of the things that also piqued my memory when we were talking about this is my first term, I was on a Judiciary Committee, and there was a proposal put forth that almost passed, and it received serious consideration to change the covenants of a particular subdivision at the request of a number of people. And the committee, I think, wisely said, no, the covenants going in is what the covenants that shall remain. They were put in there for a particular purpose. It had something to do with putting in some type of heating system that would be outside the home. So, and that it was, so it, you know, it was a consideration back then. I think it's just something we have to be aware of. That's all. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Bradstreet. Again, I just think that private covenants must not infringe on people's constitutional rights. So obviously a private covenant that said no Black people can own property here would not stand up in court. But yeah, that's not where we're at as a commission. It's just that we don't want to get in the way of these private contracts. And we certainly are not going to eliminate municipal control over how best to develop housing in their communities. Representative Drinkwater has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glad to hear you bring up local control, because I'm reading here on page 14 about, you know, in the Constitution, it's called home rule. Mm-hmm. So what we're proposing is to usurp local control. And we're going to do that, if I'm understanding correctly, we're going to do that with incentives. Am I reading this correctly?
No, what you're reading is the recommendation, which I believe is number 4, although I took the presentation off my screen, so I don't see them anymore. But the incentive program is intended to do exactly the opposite of what you're saying. It is intended to incentivize communities to have these conversations. And if they come up with nothing, you know, no harm, no foul. But if they do come up with changes that would spur the housing opportunities in their community, then they would receive it. So they basically the way the program is proposed in the commission's report is first the community that chooses on their own volition to participate. No one's being forced to participate in the incentive program. If they choose to participate, they receive a financial reward for doing so. And then over the next 3 years, they will most likely, I would imagine they'll establish some kind of working group where they have maybe town council members, selectmen, select women, select people. They will have members of the community, whomever they might decide will be a part of this working group will then take on the work of looking at what their zoning currently says, looking at what other communities maybe have done, maybe bringing in some experts, maybe bringing in as the city of Auburn did. They brought in a professor from a university in Virginia who offered his services at no cost, and he was very helpful, I think, in the work that they did, for example, and having these conversations and making changes. So as they do this work and as they potentially put forward recommendations to their select board or their town council to make changes, if they were to come up with changes that improve the conditions for housing to be built, they will receive an additional financial reward. But no one is being penalized for not coming up with solutions, and they're not being forced to come up with anything. This would be a program that was more of a carrot than a stick, and that was, I think, in the spirit of the conversation we had as a commission to make sure that we weren't putting forward recommendations that were just going to beat towns over the head and say you have to do this.
Thank you. One concern that I've heard from, I'll use my area, Milford, Old Town, is our municipal sewer system is at capacity. So to expand growth is going to have a real detrimental impact on the water system, the sewer system, And talking to Herman, which is rapidly expanding because of low mill rate of 12 and being very close to Bangor, their schools are starting to be overwhelmed. And the need for growth is going to be offset by what it's going to cost to expand their schools and their sewer systems. So I would encourage that as we go forward to take into consideration that financial incentives may be needed through the Department of Education to help to say, hey, you know what? Yes, you're already using temporary housing for kids. Let's put you, at the top of the list, and also for municipal sewer systems also. So, but thank you for all your hard work.
Yeah, Representative Drinkwater, those are really, really good points. I mean, in fact, those very things came up in the course of our conversation, and particularly on the strain on infrastructure. And I know that as we talked about ADUs and we talked about increasing the ability to build up to 4 units on a lot, those things certainly came up, and making sure that a town has the ability to sign off on whether or not the wastewater and drinking water systems can support those units on a particular lot. And so I think as you see when the bill comes out, I think you'll see those provisions in place to protect those things. And I think you're absolutely right. Having incentives in place for communities to, if they're going to take on this work of expanding housing opportunities, having the right kinds of incentives in place at the right level, so that they can support more students in their school system, so they can support the investments in roads. I mean, even we talk about wastewater and drinking water, but more cars on, more people in your community, more cars on the road, more maintenance you must do on an annual basis, for example. So totally understanding of those concerns that you raise.
Yes, thank you. And I'd like to add the reading of the Constitution when we talk about municipal home rule. It is not absolute. The Constitution makes this clear. The inhabitants of any municipality shall have the power to alter and amend their charters on all matters not prohibited by the Constitution or general law, which are local and municipal in character. The legislature shall prescribe the procedure by which the municipality may so act. So we all know Title 30A is when the legislature through law prescribed those things. The legislature can preempt any local ordinance if it has a compelling need to do so. So I just want to say that we got a lot of people testifying that even as far as these recommendations go, they don't go far enough, because they don't actually mandate that municipalities do anything, and don't penalize them for not maybe achieving their affordable housing goals. And so we as a commission try to find that balance with our recommendations toward advancing state policy goals while honoring municipal home rule authority and its ability to plan its own communities. And infrastructure is certainly something that we talked about, but it is not the role of this commission or this committee to make sure that there is enough infrastructure for this development. That comes in other ways, and no municipality will be forced to develop outside of their ability to keep that burden in control. So I just wanted to make it clear to anyone listening that home rule authority is not absolute. It is limited by the legislature. And in this case, I think that the commission's recommendations, I fully believe that we work that balance out to the best of our ability. Again, these are recommendations from our commission. The devil is in the details, as we are already discussing, and some of the concerns that our Hallowell city manager has put into the chat will absolutely be addressed as we go about putting whatever these recommendations are into our statutory scheme. With that, Chairman Sylvester has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted to point out that as we're talking about resources, and as I was listening to the city of Auburn having an expert volunteer their time, it seems to me that probably one of the key pieces of this is having a state resource that can have this sort of conversation. I can't think of a better term than an ombudsman, but who can be a source of rich information for town councils who will not be housing experts as they sort through these issues for contractors, for developers, for municipalities, really to be able to work in concert. And a lot of times we're rich in ideas and poor in resources being brought to the table. And so I just wanted to throw that out. I'm not looking for an answer now. I just wanted to make sure that as we're crafting this, we keep that in mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Representative Warren.
Maybe this actually picks up on this point about resources that Chair Sylvester is mentioning, but I wonder if you could speak any further to funding and I guess thinking in a more long-term way. I know often we can be thinking about maybe the significant amount of resources that are coming in at the moment, but if we're talking about housing, we're inevitably talking about infrastructure, and we're also talking about longer term issues. So I guess I'm wondering, without a longer term plan that has to do with either building the base of monies that can be associated with this, for example, raising taxes in a certain way, or something else, cutting something else. How do we think about this in a long-term way? Are we just talking right now about federal monies and how they can be used? And I'm not trying to dampen on anything. It's more if I'm thinking about certain links to equity, maybe I'm thinking about things like climate change. It always seems like some of those considerations are the first to go. They're seen as ideal rather than built into the plan as essential. So if you could speak to those things, maybe.
Yeah, I think for the technical assistance piece, for example, I think there has to be a long-term funding solution for that. We need people, as Chairman Sylvester just mentioned, we need folks who are going to be available to communities across our state over the long term, not just here for a short blip and then they're gone, because these conversations are going to be happening in the immediate future. Because I think more and more communities are understanding how significant the housing crunch is to them and what it means to them moving forward into the future. But there are going to be communities who arrive at this conversation later than some others. And when they do arrive at the conversation, they should have the resources at their availability to lean on. And so I think that means, it probably means having some degree of staffing so that there are folks that have expertise in this field that are available at the state level for towns to lean on. It means that communities are going to need probably some kind of grant program where they have these conversations and where they do the work of going through their zoning and land use restrictions. So I think on the technical assistance, or whatever you want to call it, the sort of that liaison to the community, to our municipalities, there needs to be a long-term funding solution. On the totality of housing, yes, we need funding to build housing, and we need to continue to put funds towards that end. Obviously, that's my personal opinion, and certainly it wasn't in the scope of the recommendations made by the commission, which again was focused on zoning and land use. But certainly, as we talk about housing, we cannot forget that in order to build more housing, we need to make sure more resources are put towards the construction of affordable housing for folks across the state. We've obviously done a ton over the last 2.5 years, perhaps more than we've done in a very long time. And we've had, Chairman Hickman mentioned the federal resources we put forward using American Rescue Plan funds that total $50 million for the construction of affordable housing. Those are great resources. Great use of those resources because the need is so great, but they're not going to be here. That $50 million is one-time funding. And so, yeah, we have to continue to find the ways in which we address this. Obviously, real estate transfer tax is used for the construction of housing. And I know that there have been conversations in the legislature about increasing that tax to increase that pot of funds. I know there's a current conversation in taxation about what we do with vacant homes, especially those, when a lot of seasonal homes in the state. Those are all conversations that I think are worthwhile, because ultimately the goal of those conversations is trying to get at how do we address this housing crunch, and how do we make sure we have the necessary resources to continue to press forward when federal funds are not there to lean on. So good question. Not sure I have the solution, but I feel obviously very passionate that we continue to have folks on this committee, especially since housing is in your name, that you all are charged with the great burden, but also the great privilege of finding a way forward to address these challenges, because they are, housing might be one of the biggest issues we face in this current year, but in the years moving forward. And it's going to require a solution that is well beyond the time I have left in the legislature. So.
Thank you.
Representative Gear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question follows right on from this conversation. So thank you, Representative Warren, for raising this question. It always seems to me that we have this immense gap between policy and what happens at the state level and we determine, and then how things happen at the municipal level. And speaking as someone who grew up in a different state, there are often, in other states, ways at the county level or other intermediate levels, ways of actually implementing things. So you might have in our state, we might have the GP-COG, those kinds of organizations. It seems like we need, what we were always missing is we want to do X and then, just wait for the municipalities to decide when they want to do it. I'm curious as to whether the commission had any discussion about the best way to actually make this stuff happen, because that's the challenge that we face is a timing challenge. If this takes years to happen, we're going to be in it. The hole just gets deeper and deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Representative Gear, really good question, or really good point. I think we had those conversations, perhaps not as directly as you're laying it out, but I think if you again look at some of the recommendations, the incentive program, the technical assistance piece, I think it gets at some of those questions, and then also the ADU and the up to 4 units on a lot recommendation. In many ways, those spur the conversations from the moment of go. If we were to pass the ADU piece and the up to 4 units on a lot, we are really moving the ball forward in a significant way for all communities across the state, while still respecting that some of the more technical and maybe more mucky issues, the things that might get us a little bit more in the mud and where there's probably a bit more division on what the best approach is. We haven't just said don't have those conversations or we don't want to see those conversations taken up. We have put forward that immediate sort of urgency by saying, here's an incentive. We want you to have these conversations. We don't want to just wait around and see if you'll have them. We want to say, hey, if you even just take up the work of having this conversation, you'll get a financial reward for doing so. I feel like what does a community have to lose by compiling a group of folks with broad interests, bringing them together and having this conversation? Because at the end of the day, if they don't do anything, I hope that they find something fruitful to act on. But if they don't do anything, they still get the financial reward for doing so. And I think that was sort of part of our of what we're looking at is like, we don't want to punish communities for having these conversations or not having these conversations or taking action or not taking action, but we want them to have the conversation, because I think, and I think the commission probably agrees with me, I think once communities take the opportunity to talk about this issue in a thorough, directed way, when they start to consider what their zoning ordinances say now or what they could say in the future, I would be very surprised that you wouldn't see some sort of recommendation to a town council, to a governing body, to make some kind of change. Because I think from what I've seen from community to community that have already done this work, they have all made some sort of change that has improved the conditions for housing to be built. And so I think I'm placing my bets, and I'm placing my bet on our local decision makers and our community members elected and non-elected, to come to the table, have the discussion about some of the thorny issues that we did not take up, or we did not necessarily present a specific recommendation on, to figure out a way forward to improve the conditions for housing to be built in their communities. I'm betting on those folks. I think they're going to do this work. I think they're going to do it really well. And I think we'll probably even learn something from the process. And we might even find that there are solutions that we have not thought of that might be worth our consideration for statewide policy if it's appropriate for doing so. But we have to see this work go forward. And I'm really anxious. I want to see it. I think it's, as you mentioned, the urgency could not be greater. And I'm looking forward to seeing this work move forward.
Thank you, Speaker Fecto. Representative Gear, did you have a follow-up? I feel like you are hitting the nail on the head regarding incentivizing versus mandating. And in some ways, there are other states that have mandated that communities do this work now, and they have a date by which they must develop their affordable housing plans. This commission didn't take that route in its recommendations. And so I know that Commissioner Dufour is now here. She had her hand raised, and I have promoted her to the panel. And I'm certain that she has a lot to say about what she's hearing right now. And so I will turn the Zoom over to her as well. Commissioner Dufour, please introduce yourself, and we'll go from there.
Members of the committee, again, my name is Kate Dufour, and I am the Director of Advocacy for the Maine Municipal Association. I was also lucky to serve on the commission, which was a very interesting process. What I want to stress, what's most important about the recommendations that are in that commission report, is that they depend on partnerships, that it recognizes that we didn't get where we were today just because of municipal ordinances. There have been decades of discriminatory practices that were at the federal and state level. We had a state planning office that was available to help communities plan. That went away. So we've taken away a lot of resources that were available for municipalities to make these decisions. We have ordinances that were adopted on the basis of the feedback and recommendations that we got from professionals. So to suggest that this is a problem that was created solely by municipal zoning is not fair. And that commission report recognizes that. And it says we have to be in this together. Yes, will municipalities ultimately have to be the implementer of these ideas? Yes, but we need assistance. We need financial assistance. We need technical assistance. We need your assistance in helping educate people that this is a good move. So again, we greatly appreciate that this commission's work recognizes partnerships. And it's not okay to just say, okay, municipalities, you're at fault and you're going to correct this on your own. We are all at fault, and we're going to figure out collectively how we address this issue. So again, that is the single most important message from our perspective, that we're in it together and that we will get out of it together. And only if we work row in the same direction. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in the commission's work as well as speak to you today.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if I could just, I'll go ahead, Representative Gear. Do you have a question?
I just wanted to respond to your question, Mr. Chair, and to Ms. Dufour's comments there, because I do think, and I will just flag this for the committee, making the policy recommendations and saying, have at it, I don't think is going to work. And I do think that we need to think about what specific resources are part of that partnership that Ms. Dufour just described, and how we are perhaps more explicit or more descriptive about how that's going to work. I know I did see Mr. Lamb putting some comments about the GPCOG, et cetera, how those organizations can play a role to perhaps regionalize this effort or make it, a step-by-step process, rather than saying, just do it, saying, hey, we're going to have, some meetings, and then we're going to have, for those communities that want to run ahead right now, here are steps that we can share resources, make it more affordable and efficient to get from step A to step B to step C. And I guess that's really where I think that the rubber meets the road in terms of, are we actually going to take action on this, and how quickly?
Thank you, Representative. Commissioner DeFore, can I just put you on the spot for 1 second? Because the reconstitution of the State Planning Office came up and you just mentioned it a little bit. And I would like you to just sort of give us a primer on how that worked for as long as it worked to help municipalities plan.
So the State Planning Office was a really good resource for municipalities because prior to getting into the process of judging comprehensive plans, they were a third party, a trusted third party that had experts on all sorts of municipal issues that were available to help guide municipalities. I mean, you could pick up the phone and call somebody at the State Planning Office and they would give you resource upon resource upon resource on ways to address a particular issue, models, whatever the case may be. They were a resource for municipal government. And I think if you look at the history of what municipal government has become, I mean, when Maine was a state, you know, it was traditional responsibilities. We educated kids, we took care of the poor, we did, you know, public safety. That's what we did. But over time, the state's reliance on local government has become, the list has become longer and more complicated. And because of that, we needed that third party to help educate or help inform our processes at the local level. So to the extent that a version of the State Planning Office is recreated, not only to address housing, but climate change and everything else that we're facing, that'll be, it's absolutely important. I mean, again, I think we are the government that's closest to the people. We understand what's happening in our communities. And I understand that that can be very frustrating, that things don't happen overnight. But we are doing incredible work. And if we have the resources, we will do it. And there's an opportunity for each and every one of us to get involved. You all live in a community. You can get involved and help guide those conversations. That's what we're doing in Hollowell. Just there's an element of it that takes us all in. Again, moving forward, not just pointing fingers and saying, we are the smart guys, you are just the labor. So let's work together. And it's, you know, it's very difficult at times because there were many of these commission meetings where the municipal leaders were disparaged. And I think if we are going to move forward, I think we have to respect what we bring to the table. That's the only way these programs will be implemented. And my fear is that we will be set up for failure if we're not all on the same page.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other questions from the committee for anyone on the commission? Speaker Fecto, Commissioner Levine, Commissioner DeFore? No? Great. Well, I would therefore like to thank the commissioners for participating, and of course, thank Speaker Fecto for presenting the overview of our work. It is a long report. As you all know, in this committee, I like to be thorough. And so we have a document that will stand the test of time. And like Speaker Fecto said, it may not have all the solutions and recommendations in it that will be needed as we go and move forward, as this housing crisis could possibly get worse before it gets better. And so we as a committee now have to take all of it in and take these recommendations and listen to the other issues that are related to it and come up with, you know, a way forward for us to recommend to the state. We are the legislature. We also have the power of the purse. So when we talk about how to fund these things and where it comes from, we have to have the political will to put that in writing and make sure that it is sustainably funded over the course of time. That's our job. And so we'll have to put on our thinking caps as we go about this work this session to ensure that not only can we move these recommendations forward through legislation or through other means, but that we must be able to fund them so that the municipalities have exactly what they need to do the work that we need all of them to do in order to make sure that every Mainer is housed safely and affordably, because we cannot continue to see what happened in the Bangor area with those people dying in a fire who were unhoused. So with that, if there are no more questions or concerns from the committee at this point, of course, we will be doing this work throughout the session. I will close this presentation. We will take a short break. Thank you, Speaker Fecto. And we'll take a, let's see, what time is it? It is 11:33. We will, is anyone hungry yet? I don't think we need to necessarily break for lunch. What we'll do is we'll take a 10-minute break so we can rest our eyes and we can stretch when we make it 12 minutes. We'll be back at 11:45 to have the presentation on basic income security. See you all then. Welcome back, everyone. The Joint Standing Committee on Labor and Housing. We are now going to enter our presentation from the Commission to study the feasibility of creating basic income security. And know that the chairs of that particular committee are not here today, but our own Stephen Langland was the analyst for that commission. And so I am going to turn this over to him. I also know that there is a member of the commission here who may wish to speak to us. Their name is Sass Ninikin, and I will invite them in to share their thoughts if they are willing. In the meanwhile, Mr. Langland, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you. So the committee to study the feasibility of creating basic income security has sort of been an ongoing study for a while, in that prior to the enactment of this iteration of the study, there was a 2-year study previously on this subject. And one of the recommendations of interest in that study was to do a feasibility study on how the state, if it were to distribute basic income to individuals, sort of the mechanics and the costs and all of those things that you would want to know prior to formulating policy. So the one that was passed this session via LD 1603 had a couple of the same members, but not all, as some of them have not been in the legislature or not in the legislature anymore. So it was effective October, I think 17th or 18th, 90 days after the adjournment. So it was not an emergency. And so one of the requirements for this committee to meet was that it had to raise outside funding within 30 days after the effective date, or it could not hold any meetings. And the committee had to raise a little over $19,000 from outside funding. And it actually did so on the 30th day after the effective date of October 18th. And so given the limited time frame, the study committee only conducted 2 meetings. And the focus of those meetings centered on the aforementioned feasibility study and how to potentially conduct that. So the first recommendation is to reestablish the committee as an emergency measure for a 2-year period with the same membership, so the study committee can contract for that feasibility study, analyze the results, and then make draft recommendations to the second regular session of the 131st legislature. The reestablished study committee should include the authority to raise additional funds if necessary. So in its limited meetings that it had this interim, the study committee had about $20,000 or so to work with for a feasibility study. And it received sort of mixed messages on whether that would be adequate. And the study committee agreed that it would be better to have the authority, if necessary, to raise additional money in case that the $20,000 wasn't sufficient during the course of a formal RFP process, which would happen later this year if the legislature were to enact this resolve. So then the report and draft recommendations shall then go to the Joint Standing Committee with jurisdiction over labor matters, as well as the Joint Standing Committee with jurisdiction over health and human services matters. And each is authorized to report out legislation in the second regular session of the 131st legislature. So that was the first recommendation for the committee. And I see that Senator Guerin has a question.
Yeah, Senator Guerin.
I didn't do that. I don't know why that went up. I wasn't even in that.
No problem. It happens.
So the second recommendation of the committee was actually a carbon copy of a recommendation from the first iteration of Basic Income Security Committee. And that is to create a permanent group through legislation that includes members from agencies and municipalities which administer safety net programs, impacted individuals who access safety net programs, and other stakeholders to examine current programs to increase the coordination of these programs, streamline the process for applying for benefits, make eligibility requirements clear and easy to understand, and if possible, create a one-stop resource highlighting what benefits may be available and how to access them. So as I said, that was a carbon copy of a recommendation from the first iteration of the Basic Income Security Committee. I would note that in the legislation that authorized the study that was just concluded, that was drafted in a separate section of the bill, which was later stripped in committee. And I believe that the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future would have been sort of the entity overseeing that permanent group. In committee, so the report back for the initial study went back to the Health and Human Services Committee. And so in considering what to do with the bill, the HHS committee wrote a letter to the Department of Health and Human Services, asking them to examine some of the aspects that this working group would have done. And they asked them to report by January 15th of this year. And to my knowledge, no report has yet been received. So instead of having the Health and Human Services, instead of having the language that would have created the permanent group in the Governor's Office of Policy Innovation in the Future, the HHS committee subsequently stripped that and then simply created the study, which I'm now delivering the report on. I think that sort of answers or sort of goes over what the committee did in its two meetings. I should also say that in addition to Sass Linnekin being here, Larry Danziger was involved, though not a member, and Michael Howard was a committee member, and he's also in the audience. So if he would like to make his remarks, then.
I'll invite him in as well, and since this isn't a very lengthy report, and I erred in not mentioning that our own Representative Rader was also on the committee. And so Representative Rader, if you have anything to add to what Mr. Langland has brought before the committee, please do. If not, that's okay. I just wanted to give you an opportunity as well.
Yes, I would just like to mention something that Mr. Langland touched on and offer, if I may, my own opinion on it. We were given an incredibly limited time and we were hamstrung by the need to fundraise in advance of holding our meetings. To that end, I felt that we did a bit of a disservice to the community members that were part of this organization, part of this commission that joined in full faith of wanting to get some work done. So that was just something that I wanted to bring up a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. So I have promoted to our panel Sass Linnekin and also Michael Howard. And I do see in the chat that Larry Danziger did apologize, which is probably not necessary. But if you would like, sir, to be a part of the panel, I will just bring you in and we can have a free-flowing discussion and we'll hear from the members of the commission. So I'll begin with Sass Linnekin. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Sass Linnekin. I was one of the members of the public that was on the committee because I've experienced poverty for a good large portion of my life. I did not know I was going to be brought into this. I'm glad I'm wearing a collar. I guess I will just say, since I do now have a platform, I want to beg you to consider doing the permanent commission, the second recommendation. I really want us to keep in mind that the work of this committee wasn't just to figure out the feasibility of instituting direct cash payments, but it was to think about basic income security. And there are a lot of ways to help people to be economically secure. And one of the things that I think is so important and is probably the largest reason that I joined the committee is in thinking about how, like, there was just, I don't know how many people read the article that came out in the paper. I'm going to be writing an LTE when I'm not sick anymore in response to that article, because I feel like it did a bit of a disservice in kind of painting this picture of me as somebody who made a lot of bad decisions and then got out of poverty because I got a huge chunk of money. It's true, I did get a huge chunk of money. However, what changed my life wasn't that it was a huge chunk of money, it was that it was money. Because what was ruining my life was $1,300 in student loans. That followed me for well over a decade. It ruined my credit. It made it so that I could not get a vehicle. It made it so that I couldn't go back to school. I did not get my degree until I was in my mid-30s, and it was over $1,300. And the only reason that I was able to pay off that $1,300 is because I ended up with cash. With that said, I also was a person who was receiving Section 8, and I was on disability for a very long time. And direct cash is wonderful and can screw with people. I am part of a grassroots group that has been working on that project to end hunger in Maine by 2030. And a number of the people in that group are on disability. And when I heard about the COLA raise, it's been a little while since I've been on disability. So I almost forgot for a minute. And I said, hey, you guys are getting a huge raise. And they were like, no, we're not. Don't forget, we just almost lost our food stamps and our rent went up. So none of those people actually received a raise. And so it's extremely important, I think, that we really consider how the interactions exist between different public assistance, because things like Section 8 can take years and years to receive. And for those who are watching this that don't know what Section 8 is, it's a rental subsidy that's based on your income. And so if your income goes up, the subsidy can go down. And depending on how much your income goes up, you could lose that subsidy altogether. And like I said, it can take years to get Section 8. It could be incredibly life-changing. Sorry, I'm like on a pulpit. I'm sorry to be so long-winded. Really, what I'm trying to say is that we need to not only consider making these direct cash payments with an informed way of looking at how it may interact with the public assistance that people are receiving, but we also need to look at how these public assistance programs are working with each other anyway. Having a permanent commission that would be looking at that on a regular basis. Like, imagine how much quicker we could lift people out of poverty if we didn't take away assistance every time they got it from somewhere else. It just keeps people from starving to death. It does not pull people out of poverty. And my hope with the work that we're going to do is that we're looking at basic income security, not just basic income payments. And how can we have our systems work in a way that will actually pull people out permanently.
Thank you, Seth. Mr. Howard, do you have anything to add, sir?
Sure. I just want to underscore some points to make it clear why the legislature should consider reconstituting the committee for a third round. The first round, we did have a 2-year period, but it was severely impaired by the pandemic. We didn't meet for many months. And we did not have any authorization to contract with experts who could do a feasibility study. The second authorization did allow us to raise that money, but as has been said, we had basically about a month in which to assemble and meet, not nearly enough time to put out a call for proposals, to get a study done, which takes several months, to review that study, and then to report back. So to do the work that the committee originally was set up to do, we really need that 2-year period, emergency authorization, and if necessary, the capacity to raise some more funds. Because what we're really looking to do is to improve the state's capacity to ensure basic income security by looking very closely at areas where cash assistance can be added into the mix, or we can rearrange the way we do things now to remove a lot of the barriers for people getting the kind of assistance that they need. So those are the main things I wanted to say, and turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Are there any questions, comments from the committee on this report? I see Mr. Dassinger is here. I did promote him. So before Chairman Sylvester, Mr. Dassinger, if you would like to say a word or two to the committee, that would be welcome. You are on mute, sir.
I just want to echo what has been said, but also just to point out that direct cash payments in a number of projects and pilot programs around the country have demonstrated significant effectiveness in not only providing financial support for people, but also giving them the hope, giving them the opportunities to get out of poverty that by themselves that has not in the past been very effective. So the point of focusing on these direct cash payments is simply to say, this is an effective approach that has worked. Poverty is a huge drain on the state of Maine, just as it is a drain on individuals who are in poverty and in other states. So this is simply a strategy that we think will make a huge difference for individuals and for the state as a whole.
Thank you. Chairman Sylvester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to take a minute to sort of, well, first, just thank the folks who are on the committee. It's an incredibly important topic. Thank you to Representative Rader. Thank you to the members of the committee who are here today, and the ones who are not able to make it today. This is an issue that I've worked on in terms of both thinking about all sorts of income support and security, whether it's family medical leave, whether it's unemployment, whether, you know, these pieces that fit together or don't fit together very well. And the one thing I wanted to frame as we begin some work on this into the next session is the work of two states that we want to probably consider, and that I hope that the committee, should it be reconstituted and go forward, will consider, is the work of Massachusetts under their Republican governor, who really highlighted this one-stop shopping idea, the idea that these programs would be coordinated synergistically, so that, you know, their view, to put it quite simply, is that you log on to the mass government page and you have a relationship with that page. You have a number, it keeps your past history. And so if you're trying to apply for income security, for housing, for, you know, food, for, you know, for education, that you would click those things and that it would complete one application rather than having 5 different programs receive 5 different applications, and to not know what the different programs are doing amongst themselves. And so they have spent they started from a sort of tech way of looking at it. You know, how could our website facilitate this? And then ended up going backwards through programming to make sure the programming aligned. And it's been a very valuable lesson for them. And then I'll highlight a state that did it exactly the opposite way, Washington, where they looked at programming and sort of worked their way out to the tech. How can all the programs work together? And then how do we create technology that allows people to access this, not only in a technical way, but so that if I apply for this program, I actually get the funds in a timely fashion, so that it actually helps me, right? So that I can afford to take advantage of these programs before I am kicked out of my apartment or my family is food insecure. So I'm just highlighting that this is a sort of a two different bipartisan approaches to thinking about that one-stop shopping. We talk a lot in this committee about how programs don't talk to each other and working out of silos. And so I want us to sort of think about that in a bipartisan fashion, about how do we take these programs and make them, from our committee's point of view, work together so they make sense. Because I don't think there's anyone here in this committee that doesn't like things to work together and make sense. So I'll just sort of leave it there. I don't have any, I would have more specific comments, but I think that that's how I would like to frame this the work of this committee going forward, is to really think about the sorts of things as Ash was talking about, is, you know, how do programs not steal from each other, but work in coordination better. And I think we would be able as a committee to work with HHS to really think about that and get some good bipartisan work done. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If there are no other questions or comments from the committee, I have put into the chat a very recent article published by ProPublica, published on December 29th of last year. The title says, "States are hoarding $5.2 billion in welfare funds even as the need for aid grows." And the subtitle says, "Body Bridgeforth supported 5 children with an $8.50 an hour job when she was told she no longer qualified for welfare in Maine. But the state, like so many others, was sitting on a huge stockpile of funds." I think Maine is in the top 3 states that are hoarding welfare funds. And so I put that there just for our edification. It is an investigative journal piece. And then the last thing that I will say before we close this committee's presentation is just one of my favorite quotes from my favorite author, James Baldwin, which states, "Anyone who has ever struggled with poverty knows how extremely expensive it is to be poor." With that, I will thank the committee members who have worked on this. It does look like there is more work to do. And unless anyone has anything else to say, we will close this committee's presentation on basic income security. And with that, Mr. Langland, if we could just maybe put up on your screen sort of the work that the committee has in front of it for this session, so that we are all grounded in the work that we must complete by our deadline, which I hope to beat. But with that, please walk us through what our committee is charged with doing this session, sir.
Sure. So in addition to the 2 reports that we just received presentations over, there are a lot more reports that are due to the committee, with the potential for the committee to submit legislation based on the results of those reports. One of them is the commission to develop a paid family and medical leave benefits program, which is still meeting. The report is not due until February 1st. If you recall, the Department of Labor and this committee actually passed that large sort of omnibus bill to the employment security law on employment insurance last May. There are 2 reports that are due to this committee based on that report from LD 1564. One is about from the Unemployment Insurance Working Group, and that is due in just a few days, January 15th. And that has in statute the ability for the committee to report out a bill based on that. The other section from that bill is about the unemployment insurance recipiency rate, and that is due a little bit later on February 1st. And the committee can report out legislation based on the results of that report. Maine Housing has several reports due to the committee. One is on LD 1269. It's due actually January 15th, but they asked for an extension to February 15th, 2022. And that's about affirmatively furthering fair housing. And if you recall, that is the one where the committee members asked to sort of get all of the data from the local housing authorities that Maine Housing didn't have. So sort of a way for the municipal housing authorities to submit that information required to the federal housing and urban development to this committee. And based on the results of that report, this committee can report out legislation. The other one from Maine Housing is LD 1201, which is on fair chance housing policy options. And that is due February 15th. Another one from Maine Housing that this committee might not be aware of is LD 1305. And I say this committee might not be aware of it because it was actually in the Health and Human Services Committee. So what the bill did was it described, the report back is supposed to describe how the department, meaning the Department of Health and Human Services, and Maine State Housing Authority have worked together to maximize access to housing and income assistance, including the ways in which technology currently used and designed by the department and Maine State Housing Authority can work together to facilitate access and plans and recommendations for future coordination between the Department of Health and Human Services and Maine State Housing. As I note, the bill was heard and worked in the Health and Human Services Committee, but it does give both the Health and Human Services Committee and the Labor and Housing Committee the authority to report out legislation based on that report. It's due January 15th, and I have not yet received word on whether that has been submitted or not. It actually goes, I believe, just to the Health and Human Services Committee. Maine State Retirement System has a lot of reports due, as you know. LD 341 directs Maine PERS to study existing cooperation and any further potential cooperation of statewide retirement systems affected by the windfall elimination provision known as WEP and the Government Pension Offset Program, GPO. The report must include recommendations, and we have received that, and you should have received a copy via email. And we are having a briefing from Maine PERS on that report on Wednesday, and the committee can report out legislation. LD 1105 is another one from the Maine State Retirement System. It specifies that Maine PERS shall convene a working group to work together to develop new designs for public employee pensions based on Social Security and that have comparable benefits to the current defined benefit plan. And that was due December 1st, but if you recall, the department asked for an extension to February 15th of this year. LD 1620 is another one that was due from Maine PERS on December 1st, but was also asked to be extended until February 15th. And that is Maine PERS shall examine options and make recommendations for a plan to allow teachers to contribute, accumulate credit, and collect benefits under the U.S. Social Security Act, in addition to collecting benefits under Maine PERS. And that one also includes the ability for Labor and Housing to report out a bill based on the results of that report. The other thing that the committee has to do, other than reports and the typical LDs and public hearings and work sessions, are the quasi-independent reviews. So if you're not familiar with these, we'll certainly talk about them when we start doing them, but the quasi-independent state agencies such as Maine PERS, Maine Housing, and the Workers' Compensation Board, those ones fall under the jurisdiction of our committee. They must submit annual reports to the legislature containing the following information from the preceding year. So a list of all procurements greater than $10,000 for which the competitive bidding process was waived, a list of all persons or entities to whom the entity contributed over $1,000, and a description of changes made to the entity's financial policies and procedures. So after reviewing the reports and gathering additional information from the quasi-independent agencies, the committee has to assess whether the entity's financial policies and procedures are consistent with statutory guidelines and whether waivers of competitive procurement and contributions made by the entity comply with the entity's financial policies and procedures. And this does require that this committee write a report and address that to Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability by March 1st. I think those are the main ones. I'm happy to send this to the committee. It's possible that I might have forgotten a report or two. I didn't try to include the ones that we already are sort of aware of and scheduling, such as the GEA on Wednesday. I anticipate talking about sort of the GEA process and what that entails on Wednesday. I think that would be a more appropriate time, but I'm happy to try to answer any questions or provide any additional information if anyone has any requests.
Thank you, Mr. Langland. Can you just brief the committee on just our workload? Like how many bills do we have to process this session as well, so that we have a clear picture of that? Right now, the committee is not scheduled to meet on Fridays as we were in the first regular session. That could change, but we don't anticipate that. Our workload is modest for this session. And so, Mr. Langland, if you could just tell us how many bills we have in our possession and the suggested deadlines from the presiding officers about when they need to be voted and reported out, that would be great.
Sure. So I don't actually have an exact number of how much we have. I can tell you that we have a number that have been referred and we're still waiting on a couple to be referred. The memo I think it went to the chairs of the committee, specified that the presiding officers would like committees to focus on carryover work and sort of prioritize that. I can tell you this committee has 16 carryover bills. 7 of those are concept drafts. And we do have 2 bills that have been recommitted from the floor to the Labor Committee. So what happens when a bill is recommitted is it's essentially stripped of its amendment and brought back as drafted for the committee to rework and re-report out. As far as the important deadlines that Chair Hickman referenced, so 60% of all bills voted have to be by Friday, February 11th. So it's quite a quick turnaround in the second session. 100% of all bills referred must be voted by Friday, March 11th. And 100% of all bills referred must be reported out by March 25th. So after, I don't know which date it is off the top of my head, but after a certain date, the committee has to seek authorization to meet for things other than confirmation hearings, similar to how it did, I think it was in May or maybe late April last year. But that'll be coming up in March this year, given that it's a short session, and statutory adjournment is April 20th.
Thank you. And OPLA does not obviously get involved in confirmation hearings, but just so you know, we were asked to meet to do some confirmations before we reconvened the session. That did not work out for our schedule. And so those 14 nominations, we're working with the Legislative Information Office to have them all scheduled in 2 sessions on Monday, January 24th, in hopes that we can make our committee's recommendations on those for confirmation when we reconvene the Senate and the House on Wednesday, January 26th. I hope that you have all received the packet of nominees across the board. I forwarded those in the intercession just because we weren't sure if we were going to meet and have those confirmation hearings before January 5th. We clearly did not. But I know that everyone likes to have as much advance notice on gubernatorial nominees as possible to do your own pre-vetting, if you will. So you should have those packets in your possession. They were reposted, which started the clock all over again, which is why we are able to have these confirmation hearings outside of the original deadline of January 14th. That will be a very long day. If in fact it comes to fruition, we don't know if everyone will be available on that day. That's why the Legislative Information Office is working that out. But we'll do the best we can to get those confirmations done before the 26th. And if we have to do some after, we have to do some after. We can't control everyone's schedule. The priority from the Office of the Governor were the Housing Commission nominees, because we want to fill those seats that are remaining on the board. So as we know, housing is the issue of the day, and we want to make sure that that board is complete and full for their deliberations going forward. I see that Chairman Sylvester has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to encourage the committee, part of the legislative process, a lot of times in the last little bit, we've been rushed because of COVID and things like this. And so one of the reasons that we backed this up was to give you the ability to reach out to folks as you're looking at their resume and to ask them questions, so that you're not seeing them for the, if you have someone that you want to ask more about their background, you want to gain more information, that's what this buffer period here is for you to be able to do your legislative due diligence on who these folks are, and to be able to, to ask them to think about things, or to, for the confirmation process, so that when we hit the confirmation process, you have a good sense of who these nominees are. I understand that is an extra burden on you as a legislator. And certainly we don't, but it's what is spelled out in statute is sort of the responsibility of the committee in nominating these folks, is that we've done our due diligence. So I want to encourage you to do that, and to get a sense of where you are before the day of having 14 folks in front of us, so that we can be as efficient as possible, but also so that you as a legislator can feel like you've done all the work that you wanted to do to not feel comfortable nominating or not nominating these folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we don't, joint rules actually say we are supposed to have pre-conferences for these nominees. The legislature has pretty much ignored that rule for as long as I have been in the legislature. And so our own individual outreach to any person who's been nominated that you have questions about, sort of like play that role. And that it was one of the reasons why we absolutely had to push these back, because we weren't interested in being rushed or not doing our due diligence as lawmakers to vet these candidates even before, these nominees, excuse me, even before they appeared to present themselves to us. We know that the script is what it is. Every confirmation hearing has to be self-contained, even if it's a long day. And so we will be reading that script for all 14 of them. We'll get bored with me talking so much, or with Representative Sylvester talking so much, but that's what we'll do. We want our state government to work efficiently and according to statute. And so I do hope that folks can at least read all of the resumes and their questionnaires before the confirmation hearings on the 19th. And of course, there is time for that. 24th, excuse me. So there's a couple of weeks for all of us to do our due diligence. Representative Gear has a question.
Just a quick scheduling question and clarification. So you're anticipating that long day of confirmation hearings will be the 24th of January, correct?
Sure. That's our anticipation. That is what the LIO is working on. And so we will do some confirmations on that day. I hope we can do them all. It really just depends on if the nominees are available. And if they're not, we'll have to have another confirmation hearing scheduled later before the deadline expires. I believe it's February 14th, or I don't have it in front of me, but again, we'll be okay. We'll get that done. Are there any other questions or concerns about our committee schedule? Is there anyone who cannot, off of the top of their head, tell us that they cannot meet on any particular day if we do get backed up and our work has to move forward? Are Fridays out for people? Are they okay for people? Anybody? I mean, we can revisit this later, but okay, great. I don't see any hands going up that Fridays are out. We don't anticipate having to use Fridays, but given what we've just discussed around housing, there may be the need to add a Friday here or there as we move forward with our work. So just keep that in mind. Other than that, I don't have anything else to share with all of you. If anyone would like to do some informal check-in to the committee about their off session or their holidays or anything else, the floor is yours. And if not, Chairman Sylvester.
I apologize for stepping in again late. I meant to say this earlier, but I've reached out to all of the legislators who have carryover bills.
Yep.
So to discuss their process of what they've been able to accomplish and what they should consider accomplishing.
Thank you.
The bill comes to us. And so good progress is being made on most of it. So you'll be glad to hear that. And we'll keep on that.
Yeah, we scheduled some work sessions on some carryover bills for January 19th. So that will be awesome. Another long day because we slowly onboarded into this session. It just had to happen. I got a new job, and so I'm onboarding with that and just need to focus on that because one has to put food on the table across the board. So that's another reason why we had to slow roll our start. But I do know that we work really well together and we will get our work done on schedule as requested by the presiding officers. Representative Gear.
Just another question from an operating standpoint here. So when we have the opportunity to report out legislation based on a commission report, that would be basically we would hear the report and then we would ask Mr. Langland. He would how does that happen? I mean, do we need to work and craft the legislation ourselves, or is there some other process?
Great question, Representative Gear. Mr. Langland has an answer.
So there are two ways to actually do it. The most common way is a majority of the committee votes sort of informally to report out a bill. And then what happens is once I know the substance and what the majority of the committee is desiring, I put that together and then it gets reported out of committee and then printed as an LD. And then it actually gets referred back and it goes through the normal course. So there might be some considerations that the committee has sort of that requires a session, obviously it has to go on the calendar and be referred formally. And we don't quite have an understanding of how many session days we're having this entire legislature. So that might be a consideration, which leads to the second option. So the second option is if the committee wants to, it can report out a bill directly to the floor, and the committee doesn't actually work it or have a public hearing on it again in the normal process. You can request permission to have a public hearing on an LR, which is the process of a document before it becomes an LD. It's an LR. So you can request permission from the presiding officers to have a public hearing on that. But if you remember, we set up this new portal system that works specifically with LDs. So while not impossible, it's logistically a little bit more complicated because it would require folks to submit their testimony directly to the clerk in sort of the old-fashioned kind of way before we had this portal set up, because the portal's not set up for LRs, but it's possible. And so what would happen then is it would go directly to the floor, and the committee would not get it back again at that point. So either way, the committee has a couple options to hear the bill, and also it really depends on whether the committee sort of wants to go forward with the standard process, which is often what the public and interested parties are used to. So they're used to seeing an LD get referred to committee and then have a public hearing. But it's possible to have a public hearing on an LR with permission. It's just, it might be a little bit more confusing. But then it would go directly to the floor and not back to committee. So we can certainly discuss that further because we have plenty of opportunities for that coming up. So.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Langland. And I have seen both, all three of those used in the 9 years I've served in the legislature. The Appropriations Committee is primarily the committee that has public hearings on LRs, which is the budget and supplemental budget work. Those don't always get assigned in LD when those hearings happen. But I have seen bills reported out of committee directly to the floor without a public hearing. So the public does still engage in the work, because if we are reporting on a bill based upon a report of some kind, the presentation happens, the public can be engaged in that report, just like today with housing. Like if we were to just turn around and say, let's report out a bill that includes all of these recommendations, we could do that. We're not doing it that way, but we could. So I've seen it all. And given the constraints of the calendar, as Mr. Langland referred to, if we were to report out a committee based upon a GEA report or based upon some other study report, we as a committee would have to decide how best to expeditiously do that while respecting transparency and making sure that our work is done on time. So I won't, preview that we'll do it one way or the other, but the calendar will dictate what we do if we indeed want to maximize our policymaking in the 130th second regular session before we adjourn. Any other questions, concerns, or comments from the committee? Seeing none, we will meet again on Wednesday, and we will have our main PERS presentations and a few other things on Wednesday, and I look forward to that as well. So until then, enjoy the rest of the New Year's first or second or third week. I don't even know where we are in it, and we will stand adjourned until Wednesday at 10 a.m. And thank you, Mr. Justin Purvis, for keeping us together in your new role. Great job today. Keep up the good work. We will see you all soon. We are adjourned.